The night was cold and the streets were quiet. Daniel walked home after a long day at work, his backpack heavy on his shoulders. He lived in a small city apartment, and every night he used the same shortcut, a narrow alley between two old buildings. Most people avoided this place because it was dark, dirty, and filled with broken trash cans, but Daniel never cared. It saved him 5 minutes of walking, and 5 minutes mattered when you were tired. Tonight, however, something felt different. As he stepped into the alley, he heard a faint sound. Like someone breathing too fast, he slowed down, his shoes making soft echoes on the wet ground. The street lamp at the far end flickered, throwing shadows on the brick walls. And then he saw her. At first, he thought it was just a homeless woman. She was sitting on the ground, half hidden behind a dumpster, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees, her body shivering in the cold night air. Daniel almost walked past her, but then her head lifted, and he froze. Her eyes were glowing faintly, not like human eyes at all. The glow was soft, like silver light, and it seemed to cut through the shadows. Her skin was pale, with a strange bluish tone, and her hair fell around her shoulders in messy strands, darker than the night itself. For a moment, Daniel thought he was dreaming. Maybe he was too tired. Maybe his eyes were playing tricks, but then she whispered, "Please." Her voice was weak, broken, but clear enough. It was not the voice of a crazy person, not the voice of someone dangerous. It was the voice of someone desperate. Daniel took a careful step closer. What are you doing here?" he asked softly. She shook her head, pulling the thin blanket tighter around her body. "No place," she whispered. "No food. No safe place." Daniel felt his chest tighten. He had seen homeless people before, but this was different. She was not human, at least not fully human. Her face was almost normal, but her ears were slightly longer, sharper, and her hands had faint glowing lines running across the skin. She looked fragile, but there was also something otherworldly about her, something powerful that she was trying to hide. He looked around, half expecting someone else to be watching, but the alley was empty. Only the sound of dripping water from a broken pipe filled the silence. Are you from here, E?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Her silver eyes met his, and she shook her head. "I cannot go back," she said, voice trembling. "They will find me." Those words sent a shiver down Daniel's spine. Who were they? Why would anyone chase someone who looked so weak and lost? He wanted to ask, but something in her face told him not to. The fear in her eyes was real and heavy, like she had been carrying it for too long. Daniel sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. He knew this was a terrible idea. He knew bringing a stranger, an alien stranger, into his life could only mean trouble, but he could not just leave her there, freezing and alone in the dirt. Against all logic, his heart pushed him to act. You can come with me," he said finally, her head lifted sharply, her glowing eyes widening. "You mean stay?" she asked in broken English. Daniel nodded slowly. "I have a small apartment, not much, but at least it's warm. At least you won't have to sleep in an alley." For a long moment she just stared at him, as if she could not believe what he had just offered. Then, with shaky legs, she stood up, clutching the dirty blanket. Daniel noticed her clothes were torn, old, and covered in dust. She looked like she had been running for days, maybe even weeks. As she stepped closer, Daniel felt the air change. There was a faint hum around her, like static electricity. His instincts told him she was dangerous, but his heart told him she was only afraid. He ignored the warning signs and held out his hand. She hesitated, then slowly placed her strange glowing hand in his. That single touch was enough to change everything. Daniel knew in that moment that his life would never be the same again. He had just invited a mystery into his world, and mysteries always came with a price. Daniel's apartment was small, quiet, and a little messy. He had not planned to bring anyone home, let alone someone so strange. The alien girl stepped inside slowly, her glowing eyes darting across every corner. It was as if she had never seen an ordinary human home before. Her bare feet touched the floor carefully, like the ground itself might vanish. Daniel closed the door behind her, his heart still beating faster than normal. He had no idea why he did this, why he trusted a stranger from the alley. She was not human, and he knew that. But something about her silence, her weakness, her fear, it pulled at him. "Sit down," he said gently, pointing to the old couch. She sat, clutching the blanket tight, watching him like a trapped animal ready to run. Daniel poured her a glass of water, his hands shaking slightly. When he gave it to her, she drank too quickly, like someone who had not tasted water in days. He frowned, noticing the scars again on her arms, faint burn marks, strange symbols etched into her skin. He wanted to ask, but he stopped himself. Instead he asked, "What's your name?" For a moment she looked lost, as if she had forgotten how to answer. Then she whispered, "Lyra." Her voice trembled, but her eyes did not leave his face. It was the first time she said something without fear. Daniel nodded. "I'm Daniel," he replied softly. "You're safe here." The words felt heavy, almost like a promise. Safe, he thought. But was she really safe? And what about him? He pushed the thought aside, focusing on the moment. Why were you out there?" he asked carefully. Lyra lowered her head, fingers digging into the blanket. "No home," she whispered. "No family, no trust, no place." Her broken English made the words even sharper, even sadder. Daniel leaned back, struggling with what to do. He was just a normal guy, working long hours, living alone, paying bills. He was not a hero, not a soldier, not someone ready to deal with aliens, but when he looked at her, he couldn't just send her back to the cold streets. That was when the idea came, strange and reckless. "You need work?" Daniel asked suddenly. Lyra blinked, confused, tilting her head. "Work?" she repeated, the word strange on her tongue. "Yes, something to do in return for food, for shelter," Daniel explained. Her silver eyes glowed brighter for a second, as if she was trying to understand. "You want me to stay?" she asked slowly. Daniel nodded. "You can help me here, clean, cook maybe, simple things." He expected her to laugh, or refuse, or walk away, but instead her lips curved into the smallest, weakest smile. She nodded quickly. Yes, I stay. I work. I help." Her voice cracked, like she could barely believe she had been given this chance. Daniel sighed, part of him relieved, part of him terrified. He had just offered his home to a runaway alien, calling her a maid. It sounded insane, and yet it also felt strangely right. That night, Lyra tried to clean the small apartment. She picked up dishes, dusted the table, moved things around, but she clearly had no idea how human tools worked. She broke a plate by pressing too hard. She nearly set the stove on fire trying to boil water. Daniel rushed to stop her, laughing nervously. "It's fine, don't worry, you'll learn," he said, though inside he wondered how dangerous her mistakes could become. At one point, she touched the broken plate. Her glowing fingers traced the sharp edges, and before Daniel's eyes, the shattered pieces melted back together. The plate was whole again, smooth and perfect. Daniel's jaw dropped, his heart skipping a beat. "What? How did you—" he started. But Lyra shook her head quickly, eyes full of fear. "No tell," she whispered. "Please, no tell." Daniel's mouth went dry. She was not just an alien. She had powers, abilities humans could only dream of. And if she was hiding this, then whoever was after her must be dangerous. Daniel swallowed hard, looking at her fragile form. She was more than she seemed, and he had just tied his life to hers. As the night grew darker, Lyra curled up on the couch, her head resting on her knees. Daniel watched her, unable to sleep, questions burning inside him. Who was she really? Why? Was she here? What had she escaped from? And most importantly, what had he just brought into his life? Outside, the wind howled against the windows, but inside the small apartment, silence grew heavy. Lyra was no longer a stranger in the alley. She was now part of his home, part of his story. And Daniel had no idea that this single offer, this foolish kindness, was only the beginning of something far greater. The clock on Daniel's wall ticked slowly. It was past midnight and the city outside was quiet. Daniel should have been asleep already, but his eyes refused to close. Across the room, Lyra sat on the couch, her thin body wrapped in the same dirty blanket. She looked so small, so fragile, yet every now and then her glowing eyes flickered open, scanning the room like she was waiting for danger. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his bed. This was insane, he thought. He had brought home an alien, a complete stranger with glowing hands and scars on her body. And now she was sleeping just a few feet away, in his own apartment. He wondered what his neighbors would think if they knew, what the government would do if they found out, but at the same time, he couldn't shake the memory of her shivering in that alley, desperate and alone. He had done the right thing, hadn't he? A soft crash pulled him out of his thoughts. He sat up quickly, his heart racing. The sound had come from the kitchen. Daniel stepped out of bed, walking carefully. When he reached the kitchen, he froze. Lyra was standing in the dark, holding a pan in one hand. Her glowing fingers traced across its surface, and Daniel watched as the old rusty pan shimmered like liquid metal. Within seconds, it looked brand new, polished, shining like it had just come from a store. Daniel's jaw tightened, part of him amazed, part of him afraid. What are you doing?" he whispered. Lyra turned, her eyes wide, caught like a child doing something wrong. "I fix," she whispered. "I must help. I must work." Her voice was trembling, but her determination was clear. Daniel rubbed his face, unsure if he should be impressed or terrified. "You don't need to do this now. It's late. You should rest," he said firmly. But she shook her head. "No rest. If I rest, they find me." Those words cut into him like a blade. They, again, always. They. Who were they? What did they want from her? Daniel wanted to ask, but her face closed up, fear hardening her features. He knew she wouldn't tell him yet, maybe not ever. Later, when she finally lay down again, Daniel watched her from across the room. Her breathing was uneven, her body twitching slightly as if trapped in some nightmare. Then he heard her whisper, not in English but in a strange flowing language. It was soft, musical, but filled with pain. Daniel stepped closer, unsure if she was awake or asleep. Suddenly, she gasped, sitting upright, eyes glowing brighter than before. Her whole body shook, her hands pressed tightly to her chest. "No, no, please," she cried, her voice filled with terror. Daniel reached out instinctively. "Lyra, it's okay. You're safe. You're here. Nobody will hurt you." Her glowing eyes focused on him slowly, her breathing heavy. Then, like a candle burning out, the glow faded, and she collapsed back into the couch. Exhausted, Daniel stood frozen, his hand still in the air. This was more than just fear. She was carrying memories too heavy for anyone. Whatever she had escaped from, it had left scars deeper than the burns on her arms. He returned to bed, but sleep never came. He just kept listening to the silence, broken only by Lyra's soft whimpers in the dark. Hours passed and finally dawn crept into the room. The sunlight touched the window, painting the floor with gold. Daniel turned his head and saw Lyra curled tightly, sleeping at last. She looked peaceful in that moment, almost human, almost normal. But Daniel knew better. She was not normal. She was something else entirely. As he stared, one thought kept echoing in his mind. He had invited her in, given her shelter, offered her work, but he had no idea what price would come with that choice. Was she really a maid or something much more dangerous? And most importantly, could he protect her from whoever was hunting her? Or would he become the next target? Daniel closed his eyes, finally drifting into uneasy sleep. But even in his dreams, he saw the silver glow of her eyes. And deep inside, he knew this was only the beginning of a night that would change his life forever. Morning light crept through the thin curtains. Daniel woke slowly, his eyes heavy from the restless night. He had barely slept, his mind filled with questions about the strange girl now living under his roof. When he sat up, he saw her sitting quietly on the floor, legs crossed, her glowing eyes half closed as if she was meditating. The dirty blanket was folded neatly beside her, and for the first time she looked calmer. Daniel rubbed his eyes, unsure what to say. Part of him wanted to ask about her powers, her scars, the people chasing her. But another part of him knew she would not answer, not yet. He decided to start simple. "You hungry?" he asked, his voice still rough from sleep. Lyra's eyes snapped open, the silver glow dimming slightly. She nodded quickly, almost too quickly. Her thin body trembled, and Daniel realized she had not eaten a proper meal in days, maybe weeks. He hurried to the kitchen, opening his fridge, which was nearly empty. Inside he found eggs, bread, and a bottle of milk, not much but enough for breakfast. As he cooked, he noticed Lyra watching from the couch. Her eyes followed every movement, the way he cracked the eggs, the way the toaster clicked, the way the pan sizzled. It was like she was memorizing every detail. When he placed the plate in front of her, she stared at the food, confused. Then, with shaky hands, she picked up the bread and ate. Daniel almost laughed, but the sound caught in his throat when he saw how fast she devoured the meal. She ate as if she had been starving for years, not just days. Eggs, bread, milk. It disappeared in minutes. She licked her fingers carefully, as if even crumbs were too valuable to waste. Daniel leaned back, watching silently, his heart twisting with pity. When she finished, she sat still, her glowing eyes softer now. For the first time, she whispered something without fear. "Thank you," she said. Her voice clear, though broken. Daniel nodded, but inside he felt a strange warmth. It was not just gratitude he saw. It was trust, the first small spark of it. But the moment of calm did not last. Daniel noticed her arms again, the scars that looked like burns or shackles. He couldn't stop himself this time. "Lyra, who did this to you?" he asked gently. Her entire body stiffened, her hands gripping the blanket again. She shook her head, her eyes glowing brighter with fear. "No ask," she whispered. "No safe." Daniel's chest tightened, frustration and worry mixing together. He wanted to know, but he could not push her, not when she looked ready to run, so he changed the subject, trying to ease her mind. "You don't have to tell me now, but you can, someday," he said softly. Her eyes softened, but she remained silent, holding her secrets close. Later, Daniel went to work on his laptop. He tried to focus, but Lyra kept drawing his attention. She moved around the room slowly, curious about everything, touching the books, running her fingers along the curtains, staring at the humming refrigerator. Every little thing seemed new to her, and Daniel realized she was not just hiding from danger, she was learning about his world for the very first time. At one point, she found an old family photo on the shelf. It showed Daniel as a child smiling with his parents. She stared at it for a long time, then asked softly, "Family, gone?" Daniel swallowed hard, nodding. "Yeah, they passed away a few years ago." Lyra's glowing eyes dimmed, and she whispered something in her own language, a word filled with sadness. Though Daniel didn't understand it, he felt the weight of it in his chest. That evening, as the sky outside darkened, Daniel sat beside her on the couch. For the first time, the silence between them didn't feel heavy. Instead, it felt like a fragile bridge, slowly forming. He didn't know why, but he felt closer to her even though she was still a mystery. She was not just a stranger anymore. She was becoming part of his life. Before sleeping, Lyra whispered again. "They will come," she said, almost too soft to. Here Daniel turned to her, his body tense. Who? Who will come?" Her eyes met his, glowing with fear. "Hunters," she said. "They do not stop." Daniel's blood ran cold. This was no longer just about kindness or pity. By letting her in, he had stepped into a fight he did not understand, and now he was part of her world. whether he wanted it or not. The night fell heavy over the city. Daniel tried to keep his eyes open as he worked late on his laptop, but exhaustion pulled at him. Lyra had curled up on the couch again, her body hidden under the blanket, her glowing eyes finally closed. For a while everything was quiet, peaceful even, but Daniel couldn't shake the warning she had given him earlier. Hunters, they do not stop. He finally turned off the light and went to bed. The small apartment was silent except for the faint hum of the fridge and the ticking of the clock. But somewhere deep in his chest, Daniel felt uneasy. Sleep came slowly, and when it did, it was shallow, filled with strange dreams of silver, eyes and dark figures in the alley. Suddenly a sound ripped him out of sleep. He sat up, his heart racing. It wasn't a normal sound. It was a low, vibrating hum, like electricity moving through the air. At first, he thought it was a dream, but then he heard another sound, soft and broken. Someone was whispering, crying. Daniel jumped out of bed, moving toward the living room. What he saw froze him. Lyra was thrashing in her sleep, her face twisted in terror, her glowing eyes flickering even though they were shut. Her hands clawed at the blanket, pulling it tight to her chest, and she whispered words in her strange language, her voice filled with panic. Daniel bent down, shaking her shoulder gently. "Lyra, wake up. It's just a dream," he said softly, but she didn't wake. She only cried harder, her whispers turning into gasps. "No, no, please, not again," she cried in broken English this time. Daniel's heart ached. He shook her harder. "Lyra, it's me, you're safe, wake up." Her eyes shot open suddenly, glowing like fire. The whole room flickered with strange light, and the hum grew louder. Daniel stepped back, shielding his eyes. Lyra sat up, her hands glowing like burning metal, her chest rising and falling with sharp breaths. For a moment she didn't see him. Her gaze was locked on something invisible, something only she could see. "Lyra," Daniel said firmly, trying to sound calm, even though fear crawled through his veins. Her glowing eyes darted to him, confused, lost. Then slowly the light faded, her breathing calmed, and she collapsed back onto the couch, trembling. Daniel crouched beside her, his voice softer now. "You're safe. It was just a dream." But Lyra shook her head weakly, her voice breaking. "No dream, they come, they always come." Daniel frowned. "Who? The hunters?" She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "They put chains, they burn, they test. No escape. Always find," she whispered. Daniel felt a chill run through him. This wasn't just paranoia. This was trauma. This was memory. She wasn't running from shadows. She was running from real people, real monsters who had treated her like an object, and now they might be looking for her, even here. Before he could respond, another sound echoed through the apartment. The window rattled, the glass shaking as if something pressed against it. Daniel froze, his eyes snapping toward the curtains. The rattling grew louder, the hum returning. Lyra sat up instantly, her body stiff with fear. "They find," she whispered. "They close." Daniel's pulse thundered in his ears. He grabbed a heavy lamp from the table, his only weapon. Slowly, he pulled the curtain aside. The street outside was empty. No people, no cars, just the cold night. But the air felt wrong, charged, heavy, almost alive. Behind him, Lyra stood close, her glowing hand gripping his arm. Her touch sent a shiver through him, not painful, but electric. "Not safe," she whispered again, her voice trembling. Daniel looked out the window once more, but there was nothing, and yet, deep inside, he knew she was right. Minutes passed. The rattling stopped. The hum faded. Silence returned. But the fear remained. Daniel finally lowered the lamp, his hands shaking. "Lyra, if they're really after you, they'll come here," he said quietly. Her glowing eyes met his, filled with guilt and sorrow. "I bring danger," she whispered. "You help me. You die too." Daniel stared at her, his chest heavy. He should have been angry. He should have told her to leave, but instead he shook his head. "No, Lyra, I'm not letting you face this alone," he said firmly. The words surprised even him, but once spoken, he knew he meant them. Lyra blinked, her glowing eyes softening. For the first time, her trembling stopped. She whispered something in her own language, a word that sounded like hope. And for a brief moment, the fear in the room lifted, replaced by something fragile, a connection neither of them could explain. But as Daniel lay awake later staring at the ceiling, he knew the truth. The hunters were real, and they were coming. And when they arrived, nothing in his quiet life would ever be the same again. The morning after the strange night felt heavy. Daniel sat at the small kitchen table, his coffee untouched, his mind circling the same thoughts. The rattling at the window, the electric hum in the air, Lyra's glowing hands. It was all too much. Part of him wanted to believe it was just imagination, but he knew better. The hunters she feared were real, and they were close. Lyra sat across from him, silent, her eyes dimmer than usual. She ate, slowly this time, each bite careful as if her mind was far away. Daniel watched her scars again. Those strange marks carved deep into her skin. He couldn't hold his question back any longer. "Lyra," he said gently, "you have to tell me the truth." Her head snapped up, her silver eyes locking onto his. "What truth?" she asked, her voice shaky. Daniel leaned forward, his voice low. "Who are you running from? What are they? Why do they want you?" Silence stretched between them, heavy and sharp. Then she looked away, her glowing eyes filling with fear. "You not want know," she whispered. "Danger if you know." "I'm already in danger," Daniel replied firmly. "You're here, in my home. The hunters rattled my window last night. I deserve to know what I'm up against." His words made her flinch, but slowly she nodded. Her hands trembled as she set down her fork. She took a deep breath, then began to speak. "I was not born free," she whispered. "I was made." Daniel frowned, confused. "Made?" She nodded, her glowing eyes glistening with tears. "Not like human-born. I was created in lab. I was test. I was weapon." Daniel felt his stomach drop. Created, not born. Her scars suddenly made sense. He leaned back, struggling to process it. "What kind of lab?" he asked. Lyra's voice cracked as she answered. "Human lab. Hidden, secret. They find my kind. They catch. They cut. They test. Make us fight. Make us break. No care if we die." Daniel's blood ran cold. The idea of humans capturing and experimenting on her was horrifying. "You escaped?" he said softly. She nodded, her hands clutching the blanket. "Yes. I run. I break chains. I burn doors. I run many nights. They chase. Always chase." Daniel's chest tightened. He wanted to reach out to comfort her, but he was frozen by the weight of her words. A weapon, he thought. She had been made into a weapon. But looking at her now, weak, trembling, desperate for kindness, she seemed nothing like a weapon. "Why me?" he asked suddenly. "Why did you trust me in that alley?" Her glowing eyes turned back to him, softer now. "You stop. You see me," she whispered. "Others walk away. You stop." The simple answer hit him harder than he expected. He had done nothing special, but to her it was everything. Still, questions burned inside him. "If they want you back so badly, what happens if they find you?" Lyra's body stiffened, her voice dropping to a whisper. "They take me, they cut again, they use me to kill, to destroy, to end." She looked up at him, her glowing eyes wet with tears. "And if they know you help me, they kill you too." Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. The danger was clearer than ever. He should have been terrified, and he was, but he couldn't walk away. He reached across the table, placing his hand over hers. "You're not going back," he said firmly. "Not while I'm here." Lyra's breath caught, her eyes wide. For a moment, the fear in her face cracked, replaced by something else, something fragile and hopeful. She squeezed his hand lightly, her voice trembling. "No one ever say that to me." The connection between them deepened in that moment, unspoken but powerful. Daniel didn't know how he would protect her, or what the hunters were truly capable of, but he knew he couldn't let her face it alone. She was more than a weapon, more than an experiment. She was someone who deserved freedom. As the day wore on, Daniel kept glancing at the window, expecting shadows, expecting the rattling to return. Lyra stayed quiet, curling up with the blanket, her body finally relaxing under the safety of his words. But Daniel's mind never rested. Now that he knew the truth, he understood the weight of the danger pressing against his walls. The hunters would come. The lab would not stop, and when they did, both his world and hers would collide in ways he couldn't imagine. That night, as he lay awake again, he whispered to himself, "She's not a weapon. She's not a test subject. She's Lyra." And with that thought, he promised silently, no matter the cost, he would stand by her. The night was quiet. Too quiet. Daniel sat awake in his bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind filled with Lyra's confession from earlier. She was created, tested, treated like a weapon, not a person. The thought haunted him, twisting inside his chest. He had promised to protect her, but the truth was clear. He had no idea how. In the other room, he heard her shifting on the couch, the blanket rustling, her soft breaths uneven. She was trying to sleep, but fear never let her rest. For long, Daniel sat up listening until he heard it, her quiet sobs muffled but sharp. Something inside him broke. He couldn't stay in bed while she cried. He stood, walking carefully into the dim living room. Lyra sat curled on the couch, knees pulled tight to her chest, tears shining in her glowing eyes. She looked up when she saw him, quickly wiping her face. "Sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I not mean to wake." Daniel shook his head, sitting down on the edge of the couch. "You don't have to be sorry," he said softly. "You've been through too much." She lowered her head, gripping the blanket tighter. "They come soon," she whispered. "I feel it. They not stop. They never stop." Her words sent a chill through him, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Then we face it together," he said firmly. "You're not alone anymore." Her glowing eyes lifted slowly, searching his face for truth. For a long moment, silence filled the room, heavy but warm. Then Lyra spoke again, her voice softer, weaker. I cannot sleep alone, not tonight," she whispered. Daniel blinked, caught off guard, his heart beating faster. "You mean, you want to stay in my room?" he asked carefully. She nodded, her cheeks flushing faintly under the glow of her eyes. Not like human think," she said quickly. "I afraid I need safe, close." Daniel exhaled slowly, his chest tight. He understood. This wasn't about romance. It was about survival, trust, and the fragile connection between them. He nodded. "All right, come on, you can stay." Lyra followed him into the small bedroom, her steps light, almost hesitant. She looked around nervously, as if expecting danger even here. Daniel pulled back the blanket, making space for her. She climbed in carefully, still clutching her thin old blanket as if it was a shield. When she lay beside him, her body trembled like a frightened child. Daniel lay still, unsure what to do. But then he felt it, her hand brushing against his arm, hesitant, searching. He turned his head slightly, and her glowing eyes met his in the dark. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice shaking. "You first human who not hurt me. You first who help." His heart tightened, the weight of her words pressing deep into him. "You deserve better than what they did to you," he said softly. Her eyes shimmered with tears, and she whispered back, Maybe I can trust." Her words were fragile, uncertain, but they carried hope, the first sign of it since he met her. She shifted closer, her forehead almost touching his shoulder, her glowing hand resting lightly on his chest. Daniel stayed, awake, listening to her breathing slowly steady. Her trembling stopped, and for the first time she seemed at peace. The silver glow of her eyes dimmed as sleep finally claimed her. Daniel stared at the ceiling, his mind racing. He knew this was more than kindness now, more than pity. This was responsibility, and maybe even something deeper. Outside, the city slept. But danger was still moving somewhere in the shadows. The hunters hadn't stopped, and sooner or later, they would find her. But as Daniel lay there with Lyra asleep beside him, he made a silent vow. He would not let them take her back, whatever it cost, whatever it meant for his life. He would protect her. Her soft voice broke the silence one last time, before she drifted fully into sleep. "You saved me." "I save you too," she whispered, barely audible. Daniel closed his eyes, his chest tight. Maybe it was the beginning of something dangerous. Maybe it was the beginning of something beautiful. Either way, it was the beginning of a story neither of them could escape.